everybody, welcome to a special episode of the Resistance broadcast. I'm John, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be doing a reaction/review of the documentary, The Skywalker Legacy, that is attached to the bonus features of The Rise of Skywalker. Joining me as always, James and Lacey. Guys, how's it going?
Going good.
Good.
I'm excited.
We had 2 out of 3 criers. We won't reveal who, maybe later. But we're going to get into it here, kind of do a chronological cruise through so that we kind of aren't rambling and bouncing all over the place, just to keep this thing structured. We're going to try to keep it around an hour, but get to all the good points of that. And so to kick things off, let me just ask you guys, did you guys enjoy the documentary?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I actually enjoyed it, I think, more than the director and the Jedi. I think it did a good job of tying the old with the new and bringing it all together, whereas director and the Jedi was cool because it was just the one movie, but I don't know, there were just so many parallels with the original trilogy and even the prequels that make you appreciate what they did with The Rise of Skywalker more than my initial reaction, which I loved the film. It's just you pick up things that you didn't pick up when you saw it in the theater.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I definitely think that that this documentary also helped, along with the novelization as well, which is out on Tuesday. But both of those together expand on ideas that I don't think people had thought about. A lot of this because it's like, you know, JJ explaining it and like producers and writers and stuff like talking about their reason why they did things and stuff. And it's like, oh, that's very eye-opening. I actually will say I felt there was a very noticeable lack of prequels. I think there's only like 3 clips from the prequels in it. So
it might be because that stuff's already out there. So they're showing you stuff that you haven't seen before, maybe.
I mean, that's fair. I think the other thing, too, is there was a specific quote that said, like, we're going back to the beginning where it started. And I was like, well, where it started was episode 1. You know, this is all the way through. But I understand what you mean by that statement. But
they're talking about...
When you're talking about the Skywalker legacy, you know, I don't know. Yeah,
they're talking about it from a movie making, how this franchise came about perspective.
I think also from the Leia, Han, Luke perspective, like they're not in the prequels, and this trilogy was tying all that up. So
yeah, and we'll get into it with the Anthony Daniels stuff and the George Lucas and all that stuff. But it starts with a flashback to the original trilogy, and you know, George Lucas saying, you know, this is my space fantasy, and that's what I kind of refer to, and you have these fans waiting outside of the set for Return of the Jedi and Jabba's sail barge, which I thought was very cool.
And says when they eventually make all 9.
That was strange. Did that guy just throw that out there? Because that wasn't on the table at that point, as far as I know.
I think it was. I think George Lucas had said, well, I picture these, you know, 9 movies. And he's also
Mark Hamill
said 12,
said it
too.
Yeah, Mark Hamill said 9 a lot in interviews, like old interviews. Like, oh, and then they're going to do the last 3.
Yeah, he did, but then also there's clips even in this documentary. He's like, and this is it. This is the last one. It's like being a senior in high school, and then you're going home, and that's it.
Yeah.
But
it is the last one of that trilogy.
Yeah.
You know?
And then they kind of take the old film style and kind of phase in new shots from behind the scenes of The Rise of Skywalker, and then it brings you into HD mode where it's like, here we are on first day 1 of The Rise of Skywalker, and everyone's coming back. And I like how they kind of did the flashback when Daisy first started, John first started, and Oscar Isaac first started compared to now. You guys have any takeaway from that, or any feels of how they started this thing? Just kind of right out of the gate, they go from George Lucas to like, bang, here we go. We're going to start, and this is day 1 of The Rise of Skywalker.
I felt that I loved that Daisy... I feel for Daisy in the sense that this was obviously her first big movie. She grew with the part, kind of. Kathleen Kennedy brought that up, like how she grew like Rey did through training and learning and being in the spotlight and stuff like that. But her saying that she's nervous at all times, I like felt for that. I was like, me too, Daisy. She was like, I'm just always nervous. Yeah. And then the other thing that stuck out to me was, first of all, John Boyega loves being on camera. It's very apparent throughout this whole thing. He's like the constant narrator of this documentary.
Yeah.
And then JJ standing on the Falcon just talking about how weird it is to be back. Like, I don't know, that really stuck out to me. How he's like, it's just weird being here. I thought I was done with this, and here I am. And I was like, I feel for that. Like, he went through this whole process of like, I'm done. Oh, you need me to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said...
I just noticed a lot of really cool J.J. Abrams shirts.
Oh, he did have a lot of cool shirts.
He has like a Trixie Burger shirt that I was like, I want that shirt.
And that's why he named it the production name, I guess. He must have liked that burger place. Like, that's why he called it Trixie, I guess. People were thinking it was this big, deep thing,
Maybe.
but he's wearing this T-shirt that said Trixie Burgers on it, and maybe it was his favorite burger joint. You know?
And it had episode 9 in it, yeah.
Yeah. And it was spelled the same. But then one thing JJ said that made me like... I'm going to bring this up a lot, this like feeling, because I kind of relate to it because, you know, Lacey, we were like the first people to really technically see the movie before any like, you know, influence from other people's thoughts on it. Mm-hmm. Very fresh. Just there's me in the movie. And you see J.J. Abrams sitting there saying, you know, all the pressure to make the first one or The Force Awakens. And he's like, and we did it and I dodged a bullet. And in other words, like he dodged the bullet of the critique because everyone liked TFA, and he's sitting there making the Rise of Skywalker, not knowing that there's going to be so much vitriol pointed at him for that movie. It's like when you see the gazelle drinking from the water, and then he doesn't know that it's about to get an alligator snapping at it. You just kind of feel bad for him there when he's saying stuff like that, and I felt a lot of that throughout this documentary. But just hearing everyone saying they love working with JJ and that sort of thing out of the gate. And, you know, they kick it off day one with a very fun vibe. You feel like there's a lot of fun energy on that set.
John dancing with Claude.
Yeah, people like
so weird.
Excited to be back and that sort of thing. There's a lot of energy and fun in the room. And we heard stuff about that, but then being able to see it is like almost being there.
I like how they did it in order of how they shot it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes documentaries bounce around and they show you the end and then bounce to the beginning, and then like I liked that they were like, okay, day one, we're at day one, then we're doing this, and this is the final scene and whatever, which we'll get to. But I really enjoyed that it went from the beginning to the end, and it was long.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about almost as long as the movie.
Yeah.
But I think Director and the Jedi was pretty long too. But and people have been making comparisons to that because that's what people always do is they make the comparisons. But
completely different.
Yeah, I felt like Director and the Jedi was more of like this is Rian Johnson's experience, his POV of making a movie as a director, whereas this is we're making a Star Wars movie and everyone's involved. Like Rian Johnson was in almost every aspect of that documentary. Whereas this, they kind of bounce around all these different people, and it's a different type of documentary.
They interviewed a lot of different people in this one, that's why I think I enjoyed it more, is because you heard from the props guy and like the visual effects trainee, that kind of stuff. Which I was like, I'm pumped that it's not just actors and JJ.
Yeah, I thought the big takeaway from it was the lead stunt coordinator. What was her name?
Oh, Eunice.
Joanna?
Yeah.
Eunice.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to her in a bit.
I was like, dude, she's in so many scenes, and they, interview her, and they all seem to like really love her, and she's just seems to always be there. Yeah, it's good.
I'm gonna try to keep us on a chronological order here, so we're not bouncing too much around, because we want to keep this tight. But they do mention that the new generation carries this movie for the first time, so that was their focus. It wasn't an accident that they marketed it that way, and they built the story that way. But then they go into this whole thing about Princess Leia, and they show the old interviews with Carrie Fisher and that sort of thing. Did that hit you guys like it hit me? Because seeing her...
And I cried for the first time.
Yeah.
in this whole thing.
Which part? Because there was one part it made me like get a little sad.
It was the part where it's the old footage of Carrie Fisher talking about how Leia is braver than her and more aggressive than her, and how she'll always be known as Princess Leia just as other people are known for other characters. I think she gave the example of Gone with the Wind. Like, she'll always be known for that role.
Scarlett O'Hara. Yeah,
I'm always going to be known for this role. And it's true. But then, like, I don't know, it just struck a chord with me when she was just like, and then I wish I could be like her and be strong like her. And I was like, oh my God, I can't. I'm just crying. Started immediately. And that's not the only, this whole video, it's going to be like, okay, this is the second time I cried.
Yeah. Yeah. I got worse as it went on, I felt. But when she said, I'm going to be known as Princess Leia till I'm 85, that killed me.
Yep, that's the same clip.
I know, but her saying 85 and she left at 60. Like,
yeah,
that sucks. But I'm glad they went back and showed us some interviews from TFA with Carrie Fisher, where she's like, J.J. Abrams absolutely loves this franchise and he loves these movies, and it makes you think that if she was around for episode 9, she'd be happy that he was coming back and that sort of thing, and how much, and we could probably get into it a little bit more, but how much Billy Lord supported what they were doing, and J.J. did that kind of speech when they were doing the first Carrie scene, and he's like, I would ask for a moment of silence, but she wouldn't like that, so let's just try to celebrate her life. And then he turns to Billy and says, like, almost like, do you want to say something? And she's like, no, like, you got it, or whatever. And I like that moment. It was very quick, but
I thought it was crazier that they built the whole movie around her, basically. Like, they tell you that. They're like, we found lines, we would send over the lines, and then they'd be like, how can we do this? And then they lined it up perfectly with different characters, and they sketched it out.
It's
like
crazy.
It made me laugh, that one clip of Rose being like the animated Rose reacting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember if I said it on the pod or if I said it on like a Patreon thing or something, but I remember making note of that there's only so many ways you could do it. And one of the ways would be starting with what you have and then writing the story around like specific sentences, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
And
that's what
shots
they did.
and dailies. Like they were saying they pulled dailies from TFA and stuff. So just insane the amount of, and we've talked about it, the amount of care they put into that.
A side note, though, we see for the first time in action the animatronic Maz, which is a combination of a puppet and someone in a kind of motion capture suit that's also part of the animatronic. So that's what they meant, I think, by motion capture and puppet. Is like they had someone wearing this thing that was like making your move.
The new technologies that they put forth in this movie that I hadn't seen before blew me away.
Yeah.
And there's one part later that I thought was CG that wasn't. Absolutely blew my mind. But next, stunts. Speaking of not CGI stuff, like you were just saying, James. Eunice Huthart, who was working with both Daisy and Adam. Any takeaways from the breakaway star from this documentary, who I've been trying to find contact information for, by the way, James?
Just that I think when it first started, I was like, okay, so this is like the stunt section, and we're talking about the stunts here, and this was the person who was involved in it, and I didn't think anything of it. And then throughout every other section of this documentary, this person just kept popping up and kept popping up and kept popping up, and I was like, it almost became like a secondary game. Like, where is that person? I know they're on that set. There she is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just funny to me because I kept seeing like, oh, well, of course, like there's a lot of stunts in this movie, so they're going to be here for like almost everything. And she felt almost even more than like a second unit director. It felt like she was just there all the time, like Chris Terrio, you know? Yeah. I feel like I saw more of her than Chris and Kathleen, you know? It's just that I was like, this person is around a lot, and it's very important because, I mean, the movie is so many stunts that having that person there is great.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought it was crazy that, you know, Daisy and Adam did a lot of the stunts themselves and all the fighting themselves, but particularly with Adam, like he was very particular in being like, I'm doing all of this. Mm-hmm. And I loved how Eunice was like, no, we got into a huge fight about it. And I was like, if you're bad, I'm throwing in a stunt guy. And he's like, I won't be bad. Right. And then he ended up doing it himself, which is just so cool because it just goes back to that thing we always say where it's like actors are really into it. They're really passionate. They want to be a part of it. That's one more step into that is they're willing to put their own safety and, you know, physical bodies into the role like that, where you're on wires and you're jumping around, you're doing all this stuff.
It's risky too, because if they get hurt, then you're shutting down production.
Like Harrison Ford.
Yeah. That's a perfect example, right? And it happened on a J.J. Abrams movie. So
it's actually kind of odd to me that you were saying that, Lacey, because when I heard that, I was like thinking to myself, is that like something that people respect anymore? Like I do my own stunts.
Absolutely.
I You do? Really? I thought
Absolutely.
I thought the push these days were for stunt nominations at the Oscars and giving more jobs to these people, and like actors coming in and risking the entire production against things like that was like kind of the way that people were moving in their opinions on stunts.
I think you're crossing two things. Like, people that do stunt work definitely deserve to be recognized, but I think there's also something to be said for people that do their own stunts, like Adam Driver or Tom Cruise, that do everything themselves.
Well,
like,
also,
that's awesome.
You know,
I would say ask the stunt people that question, and they would say, "I'd rather get paid to do the work."
Of course, yes, the stunt person.
I know, but
if you ask,
I know, but I'm saying, okay.
If you ask a director, they want the organic feel of the actual
act. Do they?
Act.
It's riskier.
No, I think if they're able to do a stunt, they consult with the stunt people who are the stunt coordinators. They're like, this person could do this stunt, or we'll take care of them, or this, that, the other. But it's interesting that with the Adam Driver thing, though, because his character is in a mask for those sequences they're talking about, they could have easily have gotten a 6'3" stuntman to do it. So it wasn't like I need the facial recognition. It needs to be Adam Driver's face. And just even wanting to make sure he had the right nuances and stuff shows... No, like, character's personality aside, just like everyone has their own body language. Like, you could see a friend walking down the street, and you could almost recognize it's them if you know them really well by how they move, and that's really important. And I think that's something they didn't necessarily pay attention to back in the original trilogy, with like the 7 people who played Darth Vader in varying fights and that sort of thing. But I was just watching like Die Hard the other day, and you could so see the stuntman, and it just takes me out of the movie. But that's beside the point.
I just like that she was like, Adam was like, "Oh, Kylo Ren wouldn't move this way," and she's like, "I don't care. You don't get power if you don't do this."
Yeah,
move.
right, exactly. Yeah. And then he touched base lightly on Kylo Ren's path and how JJ said from the beginning, from TFA, he said, "You're like the opposite of Darth Vader, where you start." You're most vulnerable, whereas he ends up his most vulnerable. I thought that was interesting. But then we go into the Return of Palpatine, and I really like this part a lot, seeing Ian McDiarmid come back. And to me, it further squashes those criticisms of, they should have had a younger person play Palpatine, or this, that, the other, and, did they have to bring him back? Seeing everyone's almost fanboy and fangirling over him coming back in the makeup, like these veteran seasoned actors acting like little kids, like I got a real kick out of that. But any takeaways from this segment about Ian McDiarmid coming back, Lacey?
I am going to fully admit on the record that I've completely changed my position about Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker after watching this.
Off of this documentary?
Yeah,
wow.
Because I think, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, like I'm dumb, but hearing the process of why they brought him back and the connections they had and how it made sense, and JJ talking about that one scene about Plagueis back in the prequels and how that was his favorite scene in the prequels, and that kind of left a door open to bring him back later. Like, it was a perfect opportunity to connect it all together. Like, I know he was in a tough spot going into 9 of what do I do with Snoke dead? And now that I've seen this and heard it from JJ's mouth of why he did it.
I was going to say, because we've talked about that on the podcast and how perfect it is.
Right. And I didn't necessarily agree. I thought it was kind of a cop-out, and you're like, oh, you're bringing back this guy. But it kind of makes sense because it's the 2 grandkids of these things and the lineage and stuff like that. But I saw some criticism online of people being like, why are Chris Terrio and JJ explaining their process and explaining their theories, and like they didn't have to put that in there. I wholeheartedly think that they should have, and I'm glad that they did, because after hearing him talk about that Plagueis speech, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. And I know that people had that theory anyway, but it's different to hear it from the mouth of the person that wrote the movie.
Sure. Yeah, without a doubt. James Palpatine McDiarmid?
I mean, I don't really know that. I mean, it was cool to see, and I like the way that it was handled and all that. I didn't really take away anything that we didn't already know, which is like, it's really cool to know that this guy kind of made his way into the original movies, and then he was the right age, and now they're bringing him back. And there was just kind of this cool like feeling that almost like it was meant to be, or it was important. I almost got the same feelings from him as I did with like Warwick and Anthony and John Williams and stuff, because they're all people who were there from the beginning, and then they kind of did the prequels, and then now they're kind of doing the the cool little tie in there. So But it was nice to actually hear him like say it and explain it and then show back to back, like here's an old clip, here's a new clip,
Yeah.
It was cool.
And, and I've said this on the podcast, I'm pretty sure. I think he's like 73 or 74 years old. And, whatever, that's not that super old these days, I guess, because, Billy D's like 82 when he came back. But it probably might very well be the last time we see him. And to think that he was out there and always willing to come back, and that if they didn't bring him back, it almost would have been weirder to me. Like now that we've seen it. And just seeing him so excited and saying, like, I can't believe I had a chance to come back on the prequels, and now this was my third chance. And he was like genuinely very excited to be back. And sitting in the makeup chair, which was probably 3 hours every day.
They had him like on a...
Yeah, like those old memes we saw from the prequels of him in the makeup chair. Like now we're going to have new memes, so that's cool. But I'm just... and seeing... JJ just kind of fanning out as he's like sitting there and he's like, that's perfect. That's crazy. This is crazy. And McDermott's like, is it crazy, JJ? Is it crazy? So I thought that was cool. And it made me even happier to know that he'd come back because he was that excited to come back. They didn't have to like twist his arm to come back. But speaking of someone else who was very excited to be involved, Richard E. Grant, they kind of segue into the next of the other baddies. And I really enjoyed them talking to him about his experience doing it because, again, he's another person very excited. James, any thoughts on the Richard E. Grant bits?
Yeah, I mean, he's funny. I like to hear him saying he was walking around and he's like, I can't help myself. I have to push the buttons.
Yes.
I know they don't do anything. I have to push the buttons.
Right.
Domhnall Gleeson was good, too. Because his parts were talking about how he played the character in the first one, and then the second one, he felt everything completely changed. He was a completely different character. So even he himself, playing the character, was aware that it didn't quite feel the same. And then the third one, and this is me paraphrasing what he said. It isn't exactly, but it felt like he was like, so the third one's kind of whatever. I'm just kind of here and doing the parts and taking my time and looking around and enjoying it and just being the character.
Yeah, I agree with that. He said the first time it was stressful because it was the first one. The second time was very different. So he said that's all he said. But take what you want from that. And then he said this time I embraced it and looked around like you just said, James. Richard E. Grant. He's such a professional because you see even when someone messes up, he keeps this like that scowl on his face. He stays in character, but he's also very lighthearted and stuff. So he's like the consummate professional, but also like probably fun to work with. Whereas some people are like all pro and probably like a little Alec Guinnessy, where you're like, I don't want to piss that guy off. Whereas you feel like you could probably joke around with Richard E. Grant. I don't know, Lacey, what was your takeaway from that?
Well, speaking of Alec Guinness, they had his granddaughter in the film.
Yeah,
Sally
that's
Guinness,
cool. Yeah.
Which was kind of cool. I mean, she probably didn't do anything, but
it's like the most Irish name ever.
She sat at a table, so that was kind of cool. Richard E. Grant is wonderful, and we've thought this since they announced he was in the movie, and he's so lovely, jumping on beds and like just loving life. So it's so funny to see him scowling for like 2 hours straight.
Right.
What I took away was he just loved being there, like you guys said. Domhnall Gleeson, I think, subtly, like you guys mentions that in The Force Awakens, he has this very serious speech, which is honestly one of the best monologues in Star Wars, like amazing. Extreme monologue that JJ says he did in one take. Yeah. Then he goes to hugs the next movie. Yeah. So then this movie, he's like, I don't even know what to expect. I'm just going to take it day by day, which is just so funny to me. But there was a shot that they show you where the camera comes in and does a slow push and then comes around and does another push. Just the camera movements throughout this. I know, John, slow push, haha. You're making a face. You're making a face because I said slow push because I like a good slow push. No, the camera movements that they did are just so great in this documentary, and you kind of get to see how the camera moves, and it really makes all the difference. And he walks you through it too. JJ does. Yes, yeah, and you see the markings of like how they mark it, and it's interesting to see as he's coming down that aisle where the people are kind of sitting below him, which in itself is a cool set because you have the people above on these computer things and people below, and he's walking down the aisle. you see like he says action and then he moves and then everyone has particular things they're supposed to do. Like this guy crosses in front of here and this girl goes over here. And I can only imagine how many times they have to do it. But I did laugh pretty hard at Domhnall Gleeson's like mess ups. And I thoroughly appreciated he just kept going. Even if he messed up, he'd be like, yes, no, wait, yes, yes. And he just started yelling because I was like,
Yes.
yeah. Like, because most people, like, if they mess up, they go cut and then they start over. He was like, let me keep going. Just keep rolling and just kept going. I was kind of sad we didn't get more of Hux, I feel, in this movie. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's like he was kind of not cast aside a little bit, but when you bring in someone like Pride who's like clearly above him or whatever.
The power struggle, yeah.
He runs out of places to go as a character.
Sure.
Sure. He was kind of.
I do think they played off his character they played him off of Last Jedi and not like brought him back to the one that it was, which I think gives a little bit more credence to when Richard Pride kills him. He's supposed to be killing that annoying character, and not so much like he just killed the guy from Force Awakens, if that makes sense.
I can't help but wonder if Domhnall Gleeson's like, I wish I stayed the monologue guy.
Yeah,
not the joke guy.
Yeah, you never know. That's a good point. I do like when Richard E. Grant said and admitted, he's like, I had to have one of my lines of dialogue written on a sheet, and JJ allowed me to use it as a cheat. And then they flash back to Peter Cushing slipping up his lines.
Yeah.
And it's just like an old Star Wars trope where like some of the dialogue is just so impossible because it's just made up words and made up devices and stuff. And Harrison Ford like sticking his mouthpiece in his mouth because he just marbled his mouth. We're gonna bounce into a supermarket and So I love that that's always a part of Star Wars. And even when they make mess ups, they can connect it to old mess ups, and it's part of the charm of making the movie. So I love that.
Sure.
Then they hop over to 3PO with Anthony Daniels, which they then circle back to again towards the end of the documentary. And they show him working with George as the director in A New Hope. My takeaway from this was, in that one sequence from filming A New Hope, he makes a suggestion or something to George, and George... Yes. And George is like, well, I don't know. That might be a little tricky. And he's a very timid director. You can tell he doesn't want to like upset anybody, but he's just kind of like, we're not going to do that. But he said, Anthony Daniels said, this is the first time 3PO has been part of the gang really since the first one. And I thought that was interesting because he's a big part of like Empire and that sort of thing. So James, what's your take on this first chunk of Anthony Daniels stuff from this one?
I actually liked this section. Probably is one of my favorite parts of the documentary. I think one of the standout points for me was he said when he went out to Wadi Rum and he saw the landscape that was there, he said it instantly reminded him of the original C-3PO drawing or painting. I just had his name and I always forget it.
Ralph McQuarrie.
Yeah, McQuarrie.
Ralph McQuarrie. And they showed it in the documentary, and it looks like we all know the image of C-3PO, but I don't think we pay attention because we just think, oh, it's just a random background. He's on some world. But now looking at it, it looks like he's standing on Pasaana, Yeah. And it's like, I think that's coincidence, and only Anthony Daniels would have put that together. But I like that he said, in a way, it feels like this is my end. That's where I began. It's like he's coming home.
Yeah, I agree. Lacey, thoughts on the first chunk of Anthony Daniels in this documentary?
So this is another section that I kind of teared up because it was bittersweet to hear him talk about how excited he was to be back, and them to talk about how everyone had read the script. And he was like, wait, I have a big part? And everyone's like, you're going to love your part.
Yeah, right. That was cool.
But just talking, like letting him have his moment, I guess, is just really, really nice. Because oftentimes people focus on Luke, Leia, and Han. And he gets a little bit of time, but this was like a big chunk that was showing you the part where he shows you inside the mask. I don't know if it's this part. It might be later, actually. But
that was cool. Yeah.
Just showing you how he gets into it and people being like, I couldn't do what he does. And I really loved Chris Terrio talking about how he went to go meet with Anthony Daniels, which they all call him Tony, and we're all like, Anthony Daniels. He went to his house, and he had his old scripts, and in his scripts, he had lines that he had ad-libbed that and then ended up being in the movie.
Yeah, he switched numbers around and stuff, right? Yeah.
And then you see that clip of George, and you're like, man, this guy was probably switching everything. And George was like, please don't do that.
No, yeah, without a doubt. And, you look at the cast and stuff, and, you realize how important it was for him to be there, because he really was the last tie to everything, aside from the cameos from Hamill and Ford. R2-D2 is now officially just fully a robot, and Peter Mayhew had passed on. So he's like truly the last actual tie to everything. Even, the crew people are all different people now, from puppet people and all that sort of stuff. But that was cool. And then they bring him back later, so we'll touch more on him a bit later. But then they really get into this huge, going on location stuff for the documentary. And they start off with Pasana, with Wadi Rum, and it shows that Vic Mahoney did a good chunk of second unit directing here. And they bring in the creature people working with her, like Neil Scanlon and that and the likes of that. So I thought it was not the most important scene, but clearly a massive production, this whole Pasana thing. So Lacey, what are your thoughts on what they covered here?
So yeah, it was just 450 extras, all the costumes that they had to fly into, out of Italy and stuff like that. But the thing that stuck out to me the most was, and this is kind of the beginning, like you said, is how much puppeteering they did in this movie. And I love how they highlight it so much in this documentary, because that's one of my favorite things about Star Wars is all the puppets. But the chunk of this part that stuck out to me was all the little kids that they then made a trench, and then puppeteers were under the ground puppeteering these little kids. Yeah. And they were like, oh yeah, they cleared out the scorpions every morning. And I'm like, what? So that itself, I was like, this is insane, but it's just so cool because you don't even think about it. Like you said, John, earlier, is like, there are a lot of parts in this movie that you're like, oh, this is probably CG. This might be a little bit of a puppet, but it's probably just the camera at a certain height. No, that camera is at ground level, and they dug down to put these people in there.
Yeah. Absolutely crazy, the lengths that they went. And there's other things here that I want to point out in a second. But James, what was your take on their coverage of this pretty big undertaking, even for a Star Wars movie, this giant Pasana stuff they did?
I liked the dancing. The fact that they said they couldn't bring in extras, so specific extras or actors, so they just used like the people that were local, and it was really just interesting to watch how they designed their dance and their walk, and how they interact and all these other things about the Aki-Aki, even getting down to like the materials and what they had to use for the actual like textiles of their costumes and things like that.
Right.
And I think one of the big takeaways from me, well, there was kind of two ones here, and they're kind of the same idea, but number one was somebody said it doesn't feel like a movie production anymore because it's so big you get lost in it, and it feels more like Carnival. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, because they're walking around and like every take is just like, there's stuff going on, people are working, but at the same time there's so much to look at. It feels just like you're at a festival, and like everybody's doing stuff around you, and you're like, what do I do next? And the other thing was the importance of the festival itself, and why it was in the movie was to bring out the fact that Rey has never had an opportunity to see goodness like this.
Right.
Yeah, and in a collective, like such a big family embrace sort of way. I agree. My takeaways, hearing John Boyega say he loves going on location, and Daisy Ridley too, because they feel that they're in the world and it's very authentic. They use the word, which I find interesting, because we've been talking about how incredible the Mandalorian stuff is, and they're doing stuff out of Southern California and creating these environments and stuff like that. But then hearing these actors say they like doing these on location things because everything is there. It's not like this half of the room is that. So I'm wondering if that tips the scales in a way. Like, you don't know. They may still continue to keep going on location for Star Wars movies down the road. I'm curious where we go from there anyway. So, but I did find those bits interesting. And then the part that blew me away that I teased earlier, the sinking fields thing, I thought this was
Unreal.
CGI. I thought in the movie, I was like, that looks a little wishy-washy CGI to me, but it was actually like beans or something. They actually did it, and they dug these things with these huge bulldozers that they bring in, and they made like these huge containers for them to fall into. Like, that blew my mind, honestly, that they did that, and they had the actors hold their breath and fall through. Talk about doing your own stunts. Like, I'll hang on a wire and go like this, but you're telling me to go through these beans to where I can't see my destination, I have to hold my breath? That's a little like being buried alive. So I thought that was just insane. I thought that was crazy, but it was very cool. But I think that we go back to Pisana a little bit later, but they touch on, the creatures and that sort of thing. But then the Kijimi, which may give Pisana run for its money in what they did. And they even brought Mark Hamill in, and they talk about Kurosawa. And I didn't know that was inspired by Kurosawa, who was an inspiration for George Lucas. So there are way more George Lucas tributes in terms of his influences in this movie than I realized.
Right.
And there a lot of this happens in Kijimi here. There's a lot to get into with Kijimi stuff. One thing I'll just say, the Greeblies. The Greebles and the Greeblies, which are these little, their word for making any object look like it should be in Star Wars by adding like a bolt or something to it to make it, it could be like a rock, and then they add something to it, and they call these Greeblies, and it's always been their Star Wars term. So I like that, but there's a lot to get into here. James, your thoughts on this whole Kijimi set? It was obviously huge. There was a lot involved, a lot of people involved. Any takeaways from this segment of the documentary?
Just, I guess, size. Like, I think it's just crazy that, they actually built a set that is that size. I think that's the biggest one when it came to Kijimi for me. Because we'd all heard the Kevin Smith stuff, and we were all kind of curious, well, what's the set? And, now we're getting the opportunity to like really get a look at it from an angle, and it's like, oh, they really did legitimately just like build this city. And they talk about that on Pisana too, that, we built a small city, but that's like for production. This is straight up like this is in the movie. This is the set. Yeah. And it's huge. And it's just, I don't know. It's just really cool to think that they put all that together and then they just filmed within that environment for a couple days, Yeah. Like crazy. And a lot of characters and aliens that I don't think you really see in the movie, but they show in this, they're like, here's a headshot, here's a headshot, here's a headshot, and I'm like, I don't recognize any of those.
There's full things happening in the background of some of the scenes on like the next street over, where you hear like stormtroopers pushing people and they're aliens. Like, they probably spent 16 hours building a mask for somebody who may be on frame for a half a second. It's just insanity.
And they had those walkers that were like War of the Worlds, and you barely even see them. The closest look we get is in that McDonald's commercial. If anybody wants to go look that up, there's a McDonald's commercial, and you see it like very clearly, and it's like those are on Kijimi. That's not part of the real effects.
Right. Yeah. So Lacey, what was your take on the Kijimi stuff?
I also enjoyed Greebles, by the way. That was really good.
Just even the word
cool
itself.
Term.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a term. It was just like taking one thing that's simple and making it look more complex later. It's really, really cool. Okay, so there were kind of two parts that stuck out to me. One, obviously, is the Rey and Kylo fight. They state that they're soulmates in the Force, which I thought was an interesting way of putting it. But imagine being your soulmate and they're your enemy. Talking about doing their stunts again and doing the Force fight, which was 2 to 3 days that they did that fight. And then from production photos before this documentary came out, but you kind of get a glimpse of it, the scene of his quarters and then the scene of Kijimi is one scene set that they just shoot around.
That's so
which
cool.
Is super, super cool.
Yeah.
I love the small clip that's been making its rounds on the internet of Daisy hitting Adam and he being like, no, it's all right. And he's like in his Kylo Ren outfit, which is funny. So that's really cool. The other part was Babu Frick's droid shop, where they have a bad robot laying there, which I totally missed in the movie.
Yeah.
And then obviously it's super cool that they had John Williams in, and then his little area is all the 51 Oscars he's ever gotten.
I was waiting to talk about it because that's our next section, but
yeah, that was amazing.
You are welcome to talk about it now. You're welcome.
Well, actually, I was going to say one other thing real quick, because I have read the book.
Yeah.
And I will be doing a book discussion on Tuesday, so check that out. We're going to go through all the differences. And I noticed you picked up on this for the first time, that it was really cool that they talked about their connection.
Yeah, dyad.
The dyad. The dyad is different than what I thought it was based on the movie. And we talked about the comic recently about how, it's weird because Snoke bridged their minds, but they're showing his connection when she was younger. And it goes back a long ways. The dyad is a bigger thing that I think is now more important to the High Republic and other things like that. So
cool.
The fact that this documentary and the novelization as well explain a little bit more about what that connection is really does make me appreciate the two sides that they're on and the balance that they have together without being like, well, you're supposed to be good and you're supposed to be bad. And,
Sure.
like, I don't like that balance. But the dyad makes a lot more sense. So be prepared, for that.
Nice.
Yeah.
But John Williams.
So I liked that he, even after all these years and 51 Oscar nominations, like he never asked like, hey, can I have a cameo in Star Wars? And JJ brought it to him and Kathleen Kennedy, and he's like, oh, I don't know. And his wife is the one who said, you have to do it. It's better than everything you've ever done.
JJ was geeking. You never seen JJ geek as hard as he did with John Williams.
Well, how about JJ announcing to the crew?
The room,
yeah, in case you guys don't know who this is. I'm like, who the hell doesn't know that that's John Williams?
JJ, John, I thought of you because he's going, I'm going to give a small speech. I'm going to give a small speech if that's okay.
A big, giant part of the legacy of this franchise.
This whole documentary made me appreciate J.J. Abrams so much more. I'm like, that dude does not look worried. He just looks like he's completely in control at all times, and he loves everything that he's doing.
Yes.
And he has full, command over all situations. And one of my biggest ones was when it came to his speech, because that exact moment, he's like, hey, you wouldn't mind if I said something, would you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then he drops 3 sentences that are perfect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He did the same thing for Leia. He does it later for other
He calls him a supernatural genius.
Yes. And I'm like, how do you think of those words? And, it's just, I don't know. And Lacey, you said it, the props around him being all representative of his other movies and stuff. I'm like,
so cool.
Where's the documentation? I want to see a photo of every one of them and what movie they're connected to.
So did you guys have a favorite one?
I mean, they only showed 4,
but he mentioned a bunch.
Private Ryan. They said Home Alone.
Indiana
Tom
Jones
Sawyer with the pipe.
Yeah, it was actually 6.
The whip.
Think, yeah. And
well, you guys are forgetting the best one.
Jaws.
The Jaws barrels.
I didn't really care about the Jaws barrels.
And there was one other, the first. Hook, right? Did we say
Hook?
We said Hook.
Yeah, the thing from Hook.
I thought that was. I think that like blew John Williams away.
And the funny thing is, it blew him away, but at the same time, he's like, "Oh, that's nice."
Yeah.
Like if you or I were there, we'd be like, "What?"
Right.
What?
But it was
This
cute.
is so cool.
It was cute seeing him like. He's such a boss at what he does, so he's in an area where he's not familiar, and he's an 85-year-old rookie, like taking direction and acting, and you felt his like shyness and his timidity.
Sure.
I love that they captured that and that happened.
Yeah.
He's in the movie for 1 second.
Yeah, Daisy loves him. She was sitting there watching the scene with him.
Oh, and he gave her the signed score.
The signed score,
Oh,
and she said in
God.
an interview once that they exchange handwritten letters. It's very cute.
That's adorable. Yeah, I mean, legend. I said Anthony Daniels is the only tie. Of course, John Williams is too. But then let's move on to Babu Frick, which was really cool. I love that Mark Hamill was way more involved with the production, even though he was only there. He must have been there the whole time, even though he was only filming a couple scenes. Yeah. Talking about how Empire Strikes Back, they asked him if he wanted to pour the green mold into the Yoda mask, and he yes, I want to do that. Yeah, I would love to do that. So him reflecting back on the old times and now geeking out in the new stuff just shows what a fan's fan Mark Hamill still is to this day, and that's why people really endear themselves to him. But then he's talking about Babu Frick and how he's curious about how this actor is doing this stuff for the first time in terms of her working the mouth controls. I don't know who I'm supposed to start with here, but who wants to take Babu Frick and talk about this sequence for a little bit?
I'll go. I love Babu Frick. I mean, I think everybody does. He was one of those crazy things that came out of the movie that everybody collectively loved, right? No one could say that they didn't like Babu Frick, but Shirley Henderson is amazing. She does Moaning Myrtle in Harry Potter as well.
I didn't realize she was as old as she is. She's in her 40s, right?
Yeah, she's older, yeah.
I thought she was a kid when she did Harry Potter, but yeah.
Well, she plays a kid in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Because she has that high pitch voice that she can do. I think Babu Frick's just cool, but the part that stuck out to me, besides the puppeteering, which is rods and animatronics, is that they had a dialect coach there, being make sure this language makes sense with Babu Frick. And I was like, that's so funny, because she has this whole notebook that she's writing out. But the one clip of her making that exaggerated, go, and JJ just loses it. And he's on the ground trying not to laugh.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Yeah.
He turns to them and he goes, imagine if I left this in the movie, 20 seconds of her just saying go. I was like, I love that he has a sense of humor about it, that he's imagine if I did this, what people would say.
That's exactly what right on what you were saying, James, about how he's fully no pressure, in control, even though he's ending the Skywalker saga, just fully enjoying himself. Your thoughts on Babu Frick, and we can even meld in this next section, the 3PO with Babu Frick stuff too. What was your takeaway from this stuff?
I liked his voice when I saw the movie, but seeing and knowing that the talent was working at the same time, and hearing her kind of stumble through and figure out how they wanted to say things and stuff, it more so even brought the character to life for me. I don't know, it's almost like knowing that there's a person, you said a dialect coach, but I write alien languages, so right. She's going through that, and then your brain is trying to process a little bit more what they're saying. So it's before, when you're watching the movie, it's gobbledygook. It's just blah, 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 and you're like, okay, that's an alien sound, an alien language, whatever. But it's almost like somebody going in and breaking down what makes that language interesting to a degree. And knowing that somebody worked really hard to create it in syllables and pronunciation and things like that. And so I started paying attention to it, and I'm like, it's a really cool, interesting voice.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
I like it.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would have pinned it to a female either.
Right.
Although I think you saying it's the actress who did this, I was like, I guess I did know that in the back of my head, but to me, it wasn't particularly male or female, but it was more surprising that it was a female, because I think Babu Frick is male. So I don't know. It was just interesting.
And then they wedge, a lot of 3PO into it. Obviously, Babu Frick's main purpose is what they had to do with 3PO. But even just seeing Babu Frick, I'm like, there's no way that's the last time we're seeing this character. They'll do another trilogy just to bring back Babu Frick, I think. But just for an excuse, they're like, all right, we got to tell a Rey story. Why? Because we need more Babu Frick. That's why.
I really liked, there's a line that Mark Hamill's from the original trilogy says, that C-3PO's face doesn't have any expression. And that's something that obviously, just look at him, that. But I don't think I've ever really thought about how much of the head turning and the shoulders and the arms and stuff that it matters to fully knowing what C-3PO is thinking.
Yeah, I think.
And it really is highlighted here, because he says that, and then they show a couple clips that are a good clip to show to showcase that, and I'm like, that's true. I know exactly what he's feeling in all of these scenes, and you're looking at an actor who doesn't have any facial expression at all. It's a blank slate, and it's like, dang, man, that's pretty awesome.
And I believe part of the reason why they got him to begin with, even though they weren't going to put him in the suit, or no, they weren't going to have him do the voice originally. They got him to do the suit stuff because he did a lot of mime work. Anthony Daniels, yeah. So, and he
imagine having that on your resume.
Yeah, I'm a mime.
Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, strong communication skills, mime work.
Right, mime. Professional street mime. Yeah, so I like, again, Mark Hamill popping in here, and I was happy to see that he was around more than I had thought he was, and him talking about 3PO, and he's like, I love C-3PO so much because he's always so worried because he never... you would imagine he would just prefer to be an usher in a theater and not on these galactic adventures. And the way Mark Hamill talks about Star Wars in such a it's such a silly way and it's such a fun way is, again, one of those reminders that people need that is exactly what Star Wars was meant to be, and not this thing that people have built it up in that turns into this anger fest. So I mean, Mark Hamill should write books about his experiences because I think they would be very valuable to fans. And then they're talking about 3PO, how he kind of loves the team. And I kind of compare 3PO to he's not like a pet, but sort of like a pet in a way because he's helpless and he needs everyone to get by. And when you see him in those situations, you want to help him. Sort of thing. I think that's why people draw themselves to that character too. But then we go to the Death Star 2, this Kef Beer location. I liked their conclusions on how to present the Death Star. Originally, it was just going to be the satellite dish, and JJ's like, that would have been so ridiculous if they only the satellite dish fell down. And his logic to find that I thought was very smart. And one thing I really related to was JJ Abrams saying he liked the idea of them living in this old war relic of what had happened prior in a very physical, tangible way, and kind of revisiting history, frozen in time. And I compare that to things people always going to Dealey Plaza where JFK was shot. That street and that spot looks like it did back then. And that's what this is for Star Wars. There's the Death Star, there's the throne room. That's where Vader and Palpatine and Luke were, and that's where it all went down. It adds this weird, cool dimension to Star Wars, and I feel like JJ wanted to capture that, and I thought they nailed it. But there's a lot in that whole scene and stuff. So did you guys, James, I'll start with you. Any takeaways from the Death Star thing, how they brought it and the approach and all that?
Honestly, the biggest thing for me was hearing the people talk about building the set, how they essentially had to build it to make it look clean, and then they had to destroy it.
That was cool. Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. And one thing, and this goes kind of in that whole retcon world. I like that they did what they did, which is, in this room, we created a secret vault that I guess was there the whole time. It was in Return of the Jedi, and it's right over there, and you just didn't see it. I love that. I
like it too.
when they say Rex was in the Battle of Endor. I love that. I know it's a retcon. It's whatever, but it just adds so much weight to those scenes. Every time I watch Return of the Jedi, I'm going to be just off to the left there's this secret vault of these hidden treasures and things like that. And they also mentioned too, I don't know, maybe this is something different, but that it's battery powered, or it has some sort of energy still left in it that it recognizes Rey when she shows up, which is why it opens. Mm-hmm. It's that's legit. That's so cool.
I think those are good retcons because it doesn't affect anybody else. You can insert that into the story without having to explain someone else's story in a different way. So I'm down with that stuff. I agree. To me that's a good retcon.
But let that sink in for a second. It opens for Palpatine and it opens for Rey.
Yeah. No, I think
it's so cool.
Yeah. I didn't even make that connection really when they said it, but now that as you say it, that does make a lot of sense. That's it senses there, what have you. I wonder if it would have opened for her dad, but maybe that's a story for another time.
That's what I'm saying. I think it probably would have, yeah.
So Lacey, Death Star, there's a lot going on here. We can obviously move this also into the Ray vs. Kylo Ren stuff, but what do you want to tackle from this part of the documentary?
The set stuff was really cool. Like James said, the 2 set designers just sitting there and the one being like, we kind of just made up this room and just whatever.
Yeah.
We needed it to make sense.
Ran it over with forklifts.
Yeah, I'm talking about forklifts. Yeah. I think one of the coolest things is that they used the set designs from the original set.
Yes.
They went and got the research for it, and then they looked up the full model to get the textures and everything right. And then when they talked about, it's just funny because I think oftentimes as fans we don't get into necessarily the actual real life dimensions of things and math and science and stuff. So for these guys to be like, well, JJ wanted this on this planet, but it's, you know, this gigantic, it wouldn't fit. It would be out into the atmosphere. So we had to figure out a way to make it fit.
Yeah.
So that's where they got the satellite dish. And then they were like, that doesn't work. But that kind of stuff always surprises me because I'm terrible at math and terrible at like spatial recognition
Ratios
like that.
and
Yeah. So for them to be like, this would have been gigantic. So we had to break it up. So I was like, that's cool. I think the Dark Ray stuff was cool. That's what this goes into, right? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. Ray versus Kylo Ren and the dyad, kind of like talking about the mythic stuff, and
yeah. So
Joseph Campbell and all that.
Yeah, that was cool. I personally just loved seeing Rey as Dark Ray. I thought that was fun. I liked seeing her as Dark Ray, and then they'd cut to the scene where she's playing her, you know, normal Rey and that kind of thing. And she had so much fun with it.
Yeah.
And then they show the clip of her on the throne, which wasn't in the movie.
Was that in her vision, though?
I think it's in the vision, but they didn't use it. So the part where she's on Ochi's ship and she's telling Finn she had a vision, that's the vision she had. Like, on the throne, it was me. That's what she has, but I don't think they don't show it.
Correct. Now, I could be way wrong here, but the vision when Kylo's touching the Vader mask, do we see anything like that?
No,
they
don't. They didn't include it. I think they left it out, probably because they thought it might be confusing or give it away too much.
Okay,
that's what I'm thinking, at least.
Again, I feel weird because I'm in the spot where I've read the novelization. I know when she has the vision.
Oh, they have the vision happen in the story. Oh, when? I don't care. You can tell me.
When she's training at the almost near the beginning, she goes.
Yeah, when Kylo Ren's touching the mask.
Oh, that is at the same time.
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
And so if you're watching the movie and they have that vision where she's on the throne and they've already had trailers where Palpatine's on the throne, that to anybody would kind of give away that whole Palpatine thing. So I could see them cutting it out.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, what else you
got? What are we talking about now?
Well,
Besides Dark Ray?
Well, after we talk about Rey versus Kylo Ren and all that stuff, we're going to be moving on to Octo. So to get what you got to get out of this segment here. All the way through Harrison Ford, you know, any of this stuff they talk about on this whole Death Star.
I'm gonna let you talk about Harrison Ford because that's your favorite scene, and I'm going to hold off till Mark because he's my favorite.
James, any thoughts before I get into my gush fest about the lightsaber battle or any of that happened on there?
Oh, the water fight, right?
They talk about the water fights, yeah.
That's insane.
There's one thing about that I definitely want us to talk about.
I loved how Adam was like, it was my birthday one of those days. I don't know why that matters. Because it doesn't matter if it was my birthday or not. I laughed so hard.
He's like, I wanted to kill her more because it was my birthday.
Yeah. So here's something weird. So I because all this documentary stuff is like, oh, we know this happened in the past, but they don't really get specifics on dates. So he said one of those days was my birthday. And I go, oh, okay. So when would that have been? It would have had to been November 19th, which is his birthday, of 2019, right?
No.
It wouldn't have been 2018.
2018.
It doesn't make sense.
The movie came out in 2019.
Maybe that's what I meant. Shoot. Yeah, maybe I'm all back at words. I went and looked at my photos to see what I was doing on that day. Like, where was I at when they were filming that scene on the exact day? And I looked at it and I had a picture of Adam Driver on the Death Star, that exact scene in my thing. And I was like, how is that possible? So maybe I looked at the wrong day.
Oh, okay. Well,
you're thinking it was November 19th, 2018 then.
Yes.
They probably released the back behind the scenes photos that day.
Yeah.
November this
on
past
his birthday,
year.
1 year from the day they shot it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I loved Adam Driver saying it was exhausting. I was wet, soaked, and cold, and on wires, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny. But they were both. I mean, I think it was Anthony Daniels who said it was 6 days they shot that stuff. So they had
November,
to have been mentally gassed at that point. And that is such an. I feel like people fly by that scene in that lightsaber battle because of Leia's involvement, Harrison Ford's involvement, all that stuff that was around it. But it was a really good lightsaber fight because it seems raw. It's not like, and no offense to the prequels, it looks like they're looking to hit the person's lightsaber as opposed to hitting the actual person. Where this one, they're throwing haymakers at each other and they get tired. It looks like a real fight. And I think whoever did the choreography for that lightsaber duel did an excellent job, and it shouldn't go understated.
They did hit each other in an interview with Daisy. She said she hit him or he.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the fingers, and then he got mad or something.
Yeah, but when you're fighting, you're trying to hit someone. Whereas
right.
I felt in the prequels, they were trying to hit the other lightsaber.
Sure. Sure.
But
this was November 19th, 2018. We released this episode of Resistance Broadcast with Gina Carano and.
Oh, cool! Right on. And that's what we were.
I think she was announced that day.
Oh, maybe.
That's what we were. That's what we were up to while they were filming this scene.
While they were fighting on the Death Star wreckage.
Yeah.
How they did the Leia stuff and working in her into that, I thought that was cool. And then the Harrison Ford thing, of course, I thought was great. And they even interviewed Harrison Ford, and he said, "I never wanted Han Solo to die necessarily. I just wanted him to do something to add weight to the story." And then bring him back and doing that was really cool. And Adam Driver talking about how he loved poetically bookend, again, full circle. He used the word full circle, bringing back the same exact dialogue and what it meant. And I liked that he liked it. I thought that was cool.
And the John Williams music, they said, was not a new version of the same song. They went back, they got the actual music, and they literally just did it exactly as it was. And John Williams sang, I wouldn't normally do that, but it's good to know that, like, I think JJ said the fans will recognize it and they'll like it.
Sure.
So he was like, I was glad to do it specifically for that reason.
And it's not a main theme that's going to take you out. Like, a lot of people said, "Oh, I wish they put Duel of the Fates in for that fight," and I am so against that idea because that's Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul's fight. Like, that's their track, like, and Across the Stars is Padme and Anakin. Like, that's track from Han and Kylo isn't one where you're like, that's that theme. It's just a little piece of music that you can maybe in the deep parts of your brain make a connection, but it's not like in your face, and it doesn't take away from the scene. All right, then we cruise to, we say bye to Han Solo, and we say bye to Leia, and then there's one more to say bye to, so we cruise over to Octo, and they're talking about what's going on there. So, Lacey, why don't you, what was your takeaway from the documentary's coverage of the Mark Hamill scene?
So this is another part that I cried. So it was great to see Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker again. It was great for them to talk about how he got to have his moment in the sequel trilogy of, lifting up the X-Wing, which was a callback for Empire Strikes Back. And it was just nice for me, at least, to see Mark Hamill so happy to be Luke Skywalker again.
Yeah.
And whether you agree with his journey in The Last Jedi or not, Mark Hamill had a lot of trouble with it. And that is very apparent in Director and the Jedi, of how much he grappled with this. Who is Luke Skywalker? What does it mean to me? Because at the end of the day, Luke Skywalker is part of Mark Hamill. That's his legacy. He will always be Luke Skywalker. And it's part of basically who he is. So that really struck a chord with me to finally get to see him do this really cool Jedi thing, that he's a Jedi master even when he's a Force ghost.
Yeah.
Which I was tearing up this whole time. But the thing that got me is when he was talking about, it was an old clip of Mark Hamill, and he said that kids dream of this. You know, he's like all the other kids that dream of going on adventures, and that this can't be all there is like what they're wishing for.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Immediate tears.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's what I connected with when I watched Star Wars for the first time is, you know, the binary sunset, him looking out to the horizon, dreaming of adventure and where it's going to take him, and knowing that where he was at that moment wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning.
Yeah.
And that, oh my God, I'm getting choked up right now just talking about it. It's just the best.
It is. And it's like one of those things like where you see him lifting that X-Wing, and they talk about how they went full circle with it and stuff, but then seeing it a second time and however many times after that, you know, that's the last you're ever going to see Luke Skywalker. And that's...
Don't.
Except at the very end, of course, but his last doing something. James, your takeaways on Mark Hamill and his one scene and the Octo set and all that stuff that they did here?
No, nothing.
I thought of one thing.
One
thing made me think of you. Yeah. One thing made me think of you watching this documentary. Do you want to guess what it was?
Nope.
It was them filming with him without the effects, so he wasn't Bluke.
Yeah.
Oh. And I remember out of the three of us, you were the most upset of how blue he was. So I was like, they probably didn't even need to add any effects, really, and they could have, because it looked so good with him just being there organically.
Himself, yeah.
So I thought of you on that one. But, you know, I realized something with this scene that made me realize probably why I love this movie more than I thought I would or should. It's because there's so many tied up loose ends and bookends. And I love a conclusion and closure to things that started somewhere else. And it also makes me realize why I cried when I heard Palpatine's cackle during the trailer back in Celebration.
The rise of the bookend.
Like, just knowing that you're bringing something back that you've loved for so long to tie it up, and then that's it. Like, affects me really deeply. And
same. I loved this scene in the movie, and it's one of the ones that really bothered me in The Last Jedi is how Luke was, because it wasn't the Luke that I grew up with and I remembered. So just like in this documentary where they talk about how JJ wanted to bring Luke back and wanted to give him this moment, and I think there was something along the lines of like, it's what Mark deserves or something like that.
Right.
And I completely agree. He had a great end in The Last Jedi, but we didn't get to see him be like the powerful Jedi like this, where he's lifting something up. They
interview him for this documentary a bunch, right?
Sure.
And then there's one thing he says where he says, I love that he didn't like, he loved that Luke Skywalker never always had this aura of optimism about him.
Yeah, he's the symbol of optimism. Yes.
And it's, Mark Hamill does not like The Last Jedi. It's just...
I don't think so.
I talked to somebody who interviewed him, and they're like, off the record, he is very, but
because he's protective of the character, which is understanding.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to light fires here, but I mean, if you read between the lines when he's being interviewed and he's saying like, I love that he never lost that sense of optimism and those sort of things, but seeing him finally lift the X-Wing, some people are like, that was too fan servicey. I'm like,
no, I loved it.
Shut up! Like, that is so great that he did that, and the Yoda theme's playing. Like, fine, then I love fan service then, I guess. But then that's it for Hamill pretty much there, and he wrapped, and that was the end for Luke Skywalker in terms of his main scenes, except for the very end.
I'm tearing up just thinking about it, like how awesome that whole part was.
It's so cool. It is. And they didn't have to go back to Ireland for it. I think they built a set for it.
Sure.
And then they talk about McQuarrie and the Palpatine throne. I don't think we have to get too into that, but obviously it's again another tribute to the old stuff, the concept art. But then we have, Ben Solo and how Adam Driver's talking about it's not a seesaw anymore, and he kind of figures out what his main purpose was. You guys want to touch on that? They didn't get too deep into this, and honestly, they were right to do this. They skipped the whole Reylo thing completely, and because they probably knew they'd be doing more harm than good if they tried to talk about it. And
just real quick,
yeah.
I don't mean to like throw you off on your timeline,
no, go
but
ahead.
I did note in my notes the whole scene with Oscar where he said that he needed the extra scene with Leia to grapple with being a leader. Because that really stuck out to me because they brought in Lando. Like, that seems to be why one of the reasons they brought in Lando.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all Oscar Isaac saying to JJ, look, I don't think he'll just take this willingly from Leia. There has to be this moment of reflection.
Yeah.
And then again, going back to your whole bookends thing, having Lando coming in and being like, we had each other. That's how we did this.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I skipped over that. Yeah.
I was surprised that was like an added scene, because he goes, that's the testament of JJ to try things that aren't on paper, try different things. Sure. And I was like, so that scene just was like an actor's suggestion. I was like, it seems like a pretty important scene. Like, you definitely would have written that in. But
I love that.
Good on Oscar. I would like Oscar to be a director. That sounds. I would watch one of his movies.
I hope he.
I would too.
He sounds like he's a little bit soured right now, and I don't know if that's fans or what the story is, but I hope he
might just be tired.
I hope he comes back one day. But yeah, that was a good scene. I forget why I just blanked and didn't put it in the notes. I blanked.
It's okay. Well, going back to my notes, the whole Death Star planet Dark Ray thing, I guess I got so engrossed in watching and just stopped taking notes. So when we got to that point, I'm looking at my notes going, I skipped this whole section.
Well,
and I have a feeling it's because I was just like,
that's okay. I mean,
anyway.
Ben Solo, they don't spend a lot of time on, but they kind of talk about, they let Adam, they had Adam Driver speak a little bit about it. Do you guys have anything on, I mean, they spent maybe a minute on it. Do you guys have anything on that?
That whole minute is everywhere on the internet. That entire minute is everywhere.
For good and bad.
It is honestly the first clip I saw from this documentary before I watched it was this clip with Adam. The only thing that really stuck out to me is he said that he didn't know, as Ben Solo didn't know what he was doing, which is very Han Solo, I feel. And then he said, and he didn't really care what happened as long as he was with her. And I was like, that's so simple, so pure, so awesome. And he seemed to be understanding of the death, which I know we've talked about it here. A lot of fans are upset about it, but it seems like he's okay with it. Everyone that wrote the story's obviously okay with it. So I think it's time that everyone, I know it hurts, just gotta be okay with it.
Or accept what happened.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
James, Ben Solo, you're a big Ben Solo guy.
Two things kind of here. One is that, and it's kind of off track, but I'll round back out to Ben Solo, or Adam Driver, I should say. The Kathleen, or the whole documentary seems to point that Palpatine was not a part of this until the final movie. It was not part of the plans at all.
Sure.
And I go back to this thing where Kathleen Kennedy was like, well, it was our plan the whole time, it was part of the story or whatever. And another point in my mind that really points this out is that when Adam Driver's talking about his journey as Kylo Ren, he says, when JJ told me about this character's arc in episode 7, he described it as sort of the opposite of Vader. A character where in the first movie, you kind of feel like he's still teetering, but as his journey goes on, he gets more solidly into the dark side.
Yeah.
Whereas Vader, he starts off clearly the villain, and through the second movie, he becomes more real, and in the third movie, he becomes very real, very human. So it seemed to me that from the very beginning, Adam Driver and his character was hinted at being, there's this human person, and we're going to see his face, and you're going to feel connected to him, and he's just going to keep getting worse, and he's just keep going to make those mistakes. And that switched when they gave it to a different director. Not for the worse, not for the better. I mean, it is what it is. But I think that particular line was, I think, something that people have been waiting to hear for a while, because he said, well, I was told by JJ, or told at the beginning kind of what my character would be. I think this is it. And it's not what his character ended up being. It sort of is, but it sort of isn't,
Yeah, I mean, he kind of says, Ben Solo finally found what his purpose was, and the seesaw was over. Which way am I getting pulled to? He finally made his choice and that sort of thing. And then Michelle Rejwan talking about it, and she's like, we didn't get to spend a lot of time with him, but he obviously had a major impact because he saved the galaxy by giving himself to bring life back to Rey, which is It's huge, and which is good because it was different from Vader's sacrifice, and that's really the thing I cared about the most. Not repeating that. So, like, if he picked up Palpatine and threw him down a chasm, I would have been like, come on, guys.
No, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I know. He's like, nope, not this time. Bah.
Yeah.
So then
it's interesting because Adam, this is the first time we really hear him talk about the role, probably for The Rise of Skywalker, because he didn't do really any interviews that much.
Yeah, that's
really
true.
Didn't do any press tours. Like, this is so. That's
I don't even
why
think he was in this very much. Look at him
he
compared
wasn't.
to everybody else.
He totally
has
wasn't.
Like 2 lines.
And I don't know if that was a conscious decision, if Adam was like, look, I don't really want to be a part of this or whatever, or maybe they just wanted to steer away from it because they knew it was kind of a controversial character with fans where some people are just very, very protective of him. Or
somewhere on the cutting room floor or in the burning fire of that TIE fighter on Octo is
they chuck the footage in there. All the Adam dailies are in there.
No, it's probably footage of Chris Terrio talking about Reylo and the Reylo kiss and stuff, and they're like, you know what, we're not going to put that one in the documentary. That's going to cause problems. So they definitely talked about it, and they made a conscious decision to just not even include it, and I don't blame them at all, to be honest with you. But
I don't blame them, but I kind of wish I did get to hear them talk about it, because that is a pivotal moment in the movie.
Yeah. No, I agree. But I just feel like it would have caused more problems.
Sure.
But then the Cardington Air Sheds is where they, those giant blimp sheds in England where they built the giant Star Destroyer sets where they had the Han-Hans and they did that whole thing. So I thought that was cool. My takeaway from that whole scene, aside from its spectacle, which again, second to none, is Dominic Monaghan apparently wanting to keep having people say Beaumont because he said, it's very important to have your character's name known. It's very important. I thought that was so funny.
It's so funny.
He was like, yeah, so when you get shot, can you just yell Beaumont? I thought that was so funny. But did you guys have anything from this? It was obviously a big sequence and stuff from a special effects point of view, but anything takeaways from the on top of the Star Destroyer stuff?
Naomi Ackie doing the reverse horse riding.
That was awesome.
While shooting.
Yeah.
And then they did all these weird horse things on like this go-kart / horse.
Yes. Yeah.
And then just her and John Boyega having the best time ever and talking about how it's important to them as a black actor and a black actress.
That was really cool.
Leading the charge and how important it was to them. Like, that was cool to see. And just seeing them have fun. This whole documentary, just seeing how much fun people had was just really refreshing.
Yeah. Again, the gazelles drinking the water,
Yeah.
I think they went into this thinking like, we crushed it. Everyone's going to love it. TFA vibes, but, and they'll always have that, they lived that in that moment, in that bubble. So that's cool. James.
Not a whole lot that you guys, haven't already said. Again, this is another just great scene of watching them run and explosions and just thinking, I wish I could be in that room when they filmed this,
Yeah.
Pretty much that's kind of a highlight of this whole documentary is thinking like there are so many people involved and, as much as you want to say like, well, a lot got leaked. No, it didn't. Think about how many people are involved in all this stuff and nobody, they're all just keeping it secret,
Yeah, without a doubt. And then the Exegol battle. The cool thing I saw from that was they had like digital GoPros on CGI X-wings and that sort of thing, and you see
that was cool.
Dennis Lawson come back, and he's like, I don't know why they put me in an X-wing jumpsuit again, but I guess whatever.
He wanted like a full like general suit.
He wanted
or whatever he said.
the whole deal. Yeah, I thought that. That whole sequence is just gigantic, and we've talked a lot about the special effects of that, so I didn't have too much on that. James, did you have anything on the documentary's coverage of the Battle of Exegol that stood out to you?
No, I think I took a lot more away from the video that they released a while ago about ILM and how much
I was gonna say,
went into all that stuff.
Yeah.
The documentary highlights the same kind of things, but I think the big thing to me was how many different types of ships they created and how'd they get that all on screen. And I think that was better highlighted just in the ILM reel than it was.
That might have been why they
particularly
skipped
in this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Lacey, do you have anything else on the Battle of Exegol stuff?
Not really. It's all super cool. The GoPro thing was cool, especially because they were like, "Oh, we talked to old model makers," and they were like, "Oh, we wish we could have done that."
Yeah.
So it was nice to see throughout the documentary them saying they kept referencing old stuff and going back to the original people on the sets and the original productions and asking them what they thought. I love that because it seems like we're all in this together collaboration, which is what George Lucas did in the first place.
Yeah.
So when they're constantly being like, "Oh, we went back to the guy that did the original thing," it's just super cool.
Yeah, and respect for the old, like you say, and also like George always he was very loyal. He kept people around, and if people left or not, I think the connectivity of Star Wars has always been kind of a special thing. Even though they transferred from George Lucas to Disney, I think Lucasfilm itself has been a pretty consistent company. And when new people come on, they absolutely respect like the old guard, like the puppeteers and the Macquarie stuff all down the line.
Mm-hmm. You know what we actually missed somewhere along the lines here? The Warwick Davis Ewok stuff.
Did I miss that in the documentary? Because I didn't see a lot of it in it.
So that came out and that was released as an exclusive for Coming Soon or or IGN maybe or something.
I remember watching it there. I don't know if I missed it on.
Yeah,
that.
It wasn't in the documentary.
Yeah, it wasn't in this documentary.
Yeah, it was.
I don't think. It was? I thought it was.
Was it not?
I thought it was a separate thing in the special features that we.
Because the bonus content,
that's what I'm thinking.
The digital version, they throw everything together.
Yeah,
and you just watch it.
I think it's its own. It's a part of its own thing.
Right.
Yeah, I guess maybe you're right. One of the special feature, one of the other ones that isn't part of this. Okay.
I did not. I did not purposely omit.
Like they do a whole thing on the speeder battle too. That's one of the other.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Pieces.
So we get two more spots here. We got the Ajon Claw celebration and the reflections and stuff. They clearly filmed this last on purpose because they wanted to bring out the emotion that they were ending to really get like natural tears. Like I felt like Daisy Ridley's tears were like real when she sees Finn and Poe and that hug happens and then the friendship theme hits. Like I start crying every time. It's so emotional, and I love how they put together these scenes. You're gonna hug this person, you're gonna do that. So how they covered this scene. Any takeaways there, Lacey?
Yeah, it was super cool. It's amazing again how many people are involved and the way they block out these scenes where they have this guy crossing in front of the camera and this camera's going this way, and then you kind of feel that moment more for some reason behind the scenes of Finn and Poe looking for Rey and then Rey's looking because they kind of cut them next to each other. But in the movie, obviously, they cut them with stuff in between.
Yeah.
But going through each person and what this meant to them was at the celebration scene was really cool to see. But again, I don't know what it was. As soon as you see Daisy Ridley, like the music changes and she's just like, this felt like the end of 6 years of my life. And it was just like so emotional to watch because like you said, I think they were genuine tears.
Yeah.
Like she kind of grew up in this movie. She went from being 1920 to 24, 25.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot. And she's gone through a lot in those 6 years.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of who she is, just like it's part of everybody else that's
Boyega
in these
too,
movies.
Yeah. They together, they came up with that. James?
I mean, I didn't, not so much about like what you were just talking about, but like my mind was drifting to when I was in the band. I was in the band for like, 7 or 8 years, and that whole journey is now done. And the way you were describing how she knew it was like the end, I was thinking about how I didn't get like a last show. I didn't know that my journey in the band was coming to an end, and I was picturing like what it would have been like if it was like, this is the last tour James is going on and playing all those shows, and how I would have felt emotionally. Like I just played my last shows like they were just shows, and then I was out of the band.
Yeah.
So it just kind of ended, and I was just kind of calling back to like, I was comparing and contrasting the characters in this movie, or the actors I should say, going on this journey and knowing that it was wrapping and coming to an end,
right?
Versus my experience of like, hey, I didn't know this was going to be crazy, and I went on this crazy journey for this many years, and then it was just like kind of like over.
Right. Yeah.
It was just weird. So I know that's a little inside baseball and not so much about the documentary, but
that's good.
I'm sitting here. That's how it is relating to me when I'm thinking about these scenes of them wrapping up this trilogy.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point though. That they're aware of it, that it's over. And then, even doing the other movies previously, like they probably thought that was the end then, and they didn't know they were coming back. Like Anthony Daniels said it many times, I never thought I'd be back here at 70 doing this, but that these characters know that at least right now this is their end. That's for sure. That's closure for them. Like that's closing the book. And that just that whole sequence is just a very warm feeling, like that celebration there, because those people are celebrating the end of the Final Order, but they're also celebrating the end of making that movie and how much went into it, and seeing JJ just going around to everybody, and even small minor people who are in an alien costume, just like there's so much care and stuff that went into the movie that even if you don't like the movie, you have to appreciate that they brought in someone like J.J. Abrams who not only wrote it, directed it, did 2 of these, and put as much heart and care as he did to it, to even throw serious references and nods to the originals, all the way down to like little trinkets and stuff. Like this movie could have been made by someone who just didn't give a what, and they couldn't be farther from the truth, whether you like it or not. J.J. Abrams at least did what he thought was the best he can make it to honor the saga. So and then we go to Tatooine, and I had some surprises here for me. They obviously rebuilt it with the Pinewood set, and you got Anthony Daniels reflecting on that, comparing it to the actual set in Tunisia, as he puts it. I say Tunisia. I don't know what the truth is. But one, I'll let you guys go here, but one that stood out to me is they actually went to Tunisia, where the original hut is, for the burial of the lightsaber scene. That like blew my mind. That wasn't a set, because you see in the background it's the old like rotting hut, and the landscape's all there. Like they actually traveled there for that one scene. That wasn't a part of the set. That like blew my mind.
It's so crazy to me where these decisions come in. You know what I mean?
Talk about honoring.
That couldn't have been replicated. I know, yeah.
Strictly a symbol and an honoring. Like they built the whole set for the actual scene parts, and then they go there for that one sequence. Like that got me really emotional, man. That's 43 years, like again, trapped in time. That little hut, and they brought Anthony Daniels there for it too. I think just for a symbolism. So what's your guys' take on this final sequence? I know not everyone necessarily loves it, but Lacey, I'll start with you on this one.
I loved the clip of Daisy going on the sled and being terrified, and Eunice being like, "Come on, it's not that bad. You just did all this other thing, all these other things."
Yeah, what the heck?
She was just like, "I hate it. I hate everything about it." Yeah. Hearing from the set guy that built it was cool. Mm-hmm. And then it was also sad when he was like, "Now it's just." They're here, they got their shots, and now it's done, because you know how much work and time he put into it.
That's what I was going to mention, is I was actually watching the documentary and thinking, what do they do with this stuff? Does it they could tear it down, but I feel like that would just be so demoralizing that they probably think, no, we have the money to store this. This is props, this is replicas that we could reuse for future things, and just to hear them be like, no, we just tear it down, Kathleen Kennedy saying, we built this amazing thing, and I'm just thinking that could be like my life's work. Like think about how many people like spend their life and they like build a house, you know what I mean? And that's just like, that's what they do with their life. To think like there's these people who build these sets that are these replicas, and they're just the blockade runner and Agent Kloss and stuff, and then they're like, all right, let's get it out of here, and they just like destroy it. It's gone.
I was kind of hoping that they would like keep some sort of Star Wars warehouse so they can keep all this stuff in case they ever want to use it again.
I mean, they do that for props to a degree, but not for sets.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't do it like they do with Harry Potter, where they have a whole thing that you can walk through. That's all the legit sets from the movies. I went through that, and it is the coolest thing ever.
Oh, you've been there?
Yeah.
I've been there, too. I thought I would be the only one that... Yeah.
No, the door is the coolest part. The door with the snakes, that's the animatronic lock door. That's like an actual door. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know that I remember that. Is it you talking about the doors that go into the main
eating
area?
the big vault door that has the snakes on it, that's actual animatronics that the snakes crawl
That's
through.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. That wasn't
sorry,
CG.
I'd have to
Oh, it's okay.
remember it. There's a lot that I do remember, but there's tons there.
Well, we went.
Yes.
So, go. You want to go
away from
back to Star Wars?
Yes. Yeah. Away from the sets, more to kind of practical stuff. My favorite part of this was the Jawa ship, and then the perspective shot of the way in the distance that then make it look like they're the actual size next to the model, which was really cool.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. Not to bring it down a little bit, but actually listening to Black Series Rebels, I think they have a point. That would have hit home a lot more if we didn't just go to Tatooine and The Mandalorian.
I didn't care.
I didn't.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I didn't care either.
Especially because that Dave Filoni episode stunk.
No, it's not the best, but I felt that way in the movie. I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then when I heard them say that, I go, oh, that's why.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't love it for the Jawas. I love it for the technical skill that it took to get the shot.
Yeah, I think that's definitely neat. I love forced perspective.
It was also cool seeing the person in the Jawa outfit where you see their face and then the two yellow light bulbs above their head.
They're just sitting there by the fire.
Yeah. I hope a droid doesn't throw me on this fire is what they were thinking.
Right, the dead body.
Yeah. But I did like Eunice explaining to Daisy, like, she's like, well, this is how we first met you, and you sledding down here makes sense and all that stuff, because a lot of people had issues with that too. So I thought that was cool. But then them doing the track roll to the lightsabers and seeing Rey look off and then say Skywalker. They don't use this take in the movie, but she's crying when she says it in the version of the documentary. And that was amazing to me. And seeing JJ get very emotional about it.
He did.
And that's when I started getting emotional, because I'm starting to get emotional now thinking about it. Because he is getting so much crap for this movie that it blows my... And here he is right here. It blows my mind because the guy clearly put so much heart into it. They went to friggin' Tunisia just to pay tribute to the original Star Wars for this one shot. Like, you could have gotten anybody to make the Star Wars movie and it could have been whack. And whether you liked it or not, you can't deny the fact that this guy put his absolute everything into coming back when he originally wasn't planning to come back and make it. And seeing him in that frozen in time bubble of making it, not knowing that he would be getting so much crap for it, is awesome to me. Because he was...
Yeah, you hear his voice crack and everything, and he, turns away.
And he's loving what's happening there and thinking that he's doing something right by fans and not knowing that he's about to get hit with a wave of people who hate him, And getting death threats and all the crazy stuff that's out there. So I think this documentary is very important for that reason, because it may even show people, like, you know what, maybe I got to take it easy, because, I may not like it, but this guy definitely gave his everything.
Sure.
So to wrap this up, I was going to say the same thing too. I had this in mind that if you did or didn't like the movie, you ended up picking it up or whatever. I feel that watching this documentary is a new motivation for appreciation towards the film as a whole. I think if you are on the border of you maybe didn't care for it, just watch this, and I feel like your eyes get open to the amount of people and the amount of work that goes into it, because I think online or even just in everyday life, an average person that goes see a movie, they hear about, they're like, oh, this was they did this, and they is Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams and maybe 5 other people, and it's they made the decision to do this, and it's no, man, it's a whole body of so many people that are making all these little decisions, and every little decision, even down to the items that are around John Williams, 51 seemingly random items that are placed there perfectly for a specific reason, with Arabesh on them. It's just it's unreal, the level of work that goes into something like this, and it just is eye-opening, and you have to appreciate it all.
Yeah.
Right.
Lacey, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so similar to you, John, that scene, I started crying, and then I continued to cry through the rest of the documentary, and then legit, I'm not even kidding, guys, I'm not exaggerating, 10 minutes after. Like, I just kept crying to the point that Matt came downstairs and was like, what are you doing? So, because it went into, on the bonus features of the digital copy, it goes right into the next thing. Yeah. So there I am crying, and they're like, look at this speeder chase. Look at all these. And I'm like, like on my couch. So one quote stuck with me. I don't know who said it, but I wrote it down because it meant a lot to me, which was, you don't want it to be over. So. Oh,
Terrio said that.
Star Wars. Yeah. So like, he talked about how, and this goes back to what we've kind of been touching on here, is the response of this film. A lot of people were saying they didn't get this right and they didn't do this right. And for Chris Terrio to say that him and JJ had trouble with the ending because they didn't want it to be over.
Right. Yeah, that's hard time writing it. Yeah.
You can't look at them and say, oh, they didn't care. They don't care about these characters. They don't care about this stuff. They did because they didn't want it to be over. And then that kind of struck a chord with me because it's like, I, for the past 5-6 years, have been so excited for these movies that the idea that they're not happening anymore is so depressing that I was just like, it's over. What happens now? Yeah. And there's like this bittersweet kind of scary feeling that you're like, I don't know what's going to happen with Star Wars, which is okay. It's exciting too. But for me, at least, like, these movies changed my life. Like, I'm on this podcast with you guys. I've done all these crazy things that I would have never have done without these movies. So it was very, like, depressing and bittersweet for me to watch this because I was like, it's over. What now? What happens now?
Well, you know what? One day within this decade, there's going to be another It's Over, because we're going to get another saga, and we're going to meet new characters and go on an adventure. We're going to get to meet new characters and start a new set of a love affair with different droids and species and characters and stuff. So, so I'm excited about that. But you're right, it is bittersweet without a doubt. But
I just hope people, like James said, watch this and realize that there wasn't any hatred or terrible thoughts or feelings that went into this movie. It was all love and celebration and wanting to pay homage to the past and call back to the things that you love. Yeah. And I don't understand how anybody could watch this and then be like, yeah, I hate not The Last Jedi. I hate The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah. Because there's no way anyone that has any type of like humanity can be like, I don't appreciate everything that went into this movie, like James said.
Yeah. Yep. So, agreed. But that is, a long one. So we thank you guys for sticking with us. But it was a long documentary, so I wanted to make sure we touched on pretty much everything, and I think we did. So hope you enjoyed like this special episode. We have obviously our regular episodes coming out Monday, Thursday, the Clone Wars Fan Show Friday. Possibly a rumor review if I can find some new rumors. We need some more news to talk about to get more rumors, but more content coming.
Book discussion
on Tuesday, right, with Kyle.
On the novelization of Rise of Skywalker.
Another Outpost. So we have a lot of stuff coming to you guys. Some on the podcast, some just on the YouTube channel. But let us know what you guys think in the comments of the YouTube channel or wherever you're listening to this. Your thoughts on the documentary or the points we made, that sort of thing. And obviously hit us up on Twitter at RBATSWNN. Always make sure you're subscribed so you get all these alerts, all this content that we're coming out with. And going to StarWarsNewsNet.com every day. You can find me on Twitter at Johnny Hoey and Star Wars Newsnet. James?
Twitter and Instagram at Meyer Trunks.
Lacey?
Twitter and Instagram at Lacey Gilleran.
All right, guys. So like we said, fun documentary, heartfelt documentary. whether you love the movie or not, hopefully you can at least appreciate and sit back and realize what goes into making these things. It's a lot more than we can even fathom. Probably even more than we saw in that documentary. But Star Wars is Star Wars, and we love it, and that's why we do what we do here. So until next time, as always, from the three of us, see you around, kids.